The air in Miami International Airport buzzed with the hum of travelers, businesspeople in sharp suits, families dragging oversized luggage, and tourists clutching pastel-colored beach bags. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden streaks across the polished marble floors. At Gate 17, where the flight to New York City was scheduled to depart in an hour, the atmosphere was a mix of anticipation and impatience. Among the crowd stood Evelyn Harper, a woman in her late 50s with a sleek silver bob and an air of self-assured elegance. She adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, her manicured fingers brushing against the gold clasp of her Louis Vuitton handbag. Evelyn was a frequent flyer, a corporate consultant who had spent decades navigating boardrooms and first-class cabins with the same unwavering confidence. To her, air travel was a ritual of luxury, a reward for her years of hard work. She scanned the gate area, her hazel eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on a man seated near the window. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that hugged his frame with quiet precision. His skin was a deep brown, and his close-cropped hair was flecked with hints of gray. He sat with a leather briefcase resting on his lap, his posture relaxed yet commanding, as he reviewed a stack of papers with a pen in hand. His presence was understated but undeniable, like a lion resting in the shade, aware of its strength but choosing stillness. Evelyn's lips pursed. She wasn't sure why his presence unsettled her, but it did. Perhaps it was the way he seemed so at ease in a space she considered hers, a domain she had claimed through years of loyalty points and platinum status. First class was her sanctuary, and she liked it predictable. Evelyn approached the check-in counter, her heels clicking assertively against the floor. The gate agent, a young man named Carlos with a crisp uniform and a practiced smile, looked up as she slid her boarding pass across the counter. "Good afternoon, Miss Harper," he said, his voice warm. "You're all set for 3A, first class, as usual." Evelyn nodded curtly, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Carlos, I've been flying this route for years, and I trust you to keep things comfortable for me. That gentleman over there," she tilted her head subtly toward the man by the window, "is he on this flight? In first class?" Carlos glanced over her shoulder, then back at his screen, tapping a few keys. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Isaiah Coleman, seat 3B. He's a first-class passenger as well." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. "I see," she said, her tone clipped. "And you're sure there's no mistake? I mean, he doesn't exactly look like the usual clientele." Carlos blinked, caught off guard by the implication, but maintained his professionalism. "No mistake, Miss Harper. His ticket is valid, and he's been pre-cleared. Everything's in order." Evelyn forced a tight smile, her mind already spinning. She didn't like surprises, and Isaiah Coleman, quiet, composed, and inexplicably out of place in her world, was a surprise she intended to correct. As boarding began, Evelyn strode toward the jetway with her head held high, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. She settled into her window seat, 3A, arranging her scarf and handbag with meticulous care. Moments later, Isaiah Coleman appeared, sliding his briefcase into the overhead bin before taking his seat beside her. Up close, he carried a faint scent of sandalwood cologne, and his hands, strong, steady, rested on the armrest between them. He offered her a polite nod, his voice deep and measured. "Good afternoon." Evelyn returned the gesture with a thin smile, her gaze flickering to the flight attendant stationed nearby. She wasn't about to let this disrupt her flight. The cabin filled slowly, the soft murmur of passengers blending with the hum of the engines warming up outside. Evelyn shifted in her seat, her discomfort growing with every passing minute. Isaiah pulled out a slim laptop, his fingers moving swiftly across the keys as he reviewed what appeared to be a dense report, charts, maps, and redacted text flashing across the screen. She stole a glance, her curiosity piqued despite herself, but quickly looked away when he adjusted the angle of his screen. Who was this man? He didn't fit her mental checklist of a first-class passenger: no flashy watch, no designer luggage, just quiet efficiency. It gnawed at her. She pressed the call button, and a flight attendant named Marissa, a woman in her 30s with a warm smile and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached. "Yes, Miss Harper?" Marissa asked, her tone bright. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her voice hushed but firm. "I'd like to discuss a seating issue. I'm not entirely comfortable with my current arrangement." She tilted her head toward Isaiah, her meaning clear without being explicit. Marissa's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Is there something specific, ma'am? The seat itself, perhaps?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, it's not the seat. It's the proximity. I'd prefer a different arrangement." Marissa glanced at Isaiah, who had paused his typing but kept his eyes on his screen, seemingly oblivious to the exchange. "I'll check availability," she said, pulling out her tablet. "But we're nearly full today." Evelyn sat back, satisfied for the moment, her fingers drumming lightly on her armrest. She wasn't unreasonable, she just knew what she deserved, and this wasn't it. Marissa returned a few minutes later, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, Miss Harper, but there are no other first-class seats available. We do have a few in economy if you'd prefer." Evelyn's eyes widened, a flush creeping up her neck. "Economy? Absolutely not. That won't do." Isaiah shifted slightly, closing his laptop with a soft click. For the first time, he turned to face her fully, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge she couldn't quite place. Evelyn straightened, caught off guard by his directness. "I just prefer a certain level of comfort," she replied, her tone icy. "It's nothing personal." Isaiah nodded slowly, as if weighing her words, then turned back to his work without another word. The dismissal stung more than she cared to admit. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Evelyn's mind raced. She wasn't one to back down, not in business, not in life, and certainly not here. She pressed the call button again, this time with more resolve. Marissa returned, her patience visibly thinning. "Yes, Miss Harper?" Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady. "I'd like to speak to the captain. This is a matter of safety." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap, drawing a few curious glances from nearby passengers. Marissa's brow furrowed. "Safety, ma'am? Can you explain?" Evelyn hesitated, then leaned in closer. "I don't feel secure sitting here. That's all I'll say." Isaiah's hands stilled on his keyboard. He didn't look at her, but the air between them shifted, charged, heavy. Marissa exhaled slowly. "I'll need to escalate this. Please wait." As she stepped away, Evelyn felt a flicker of triumph. She had played this card before, safety was a magic word, a guaranteed response. But as the minutes ticked by and the plane leveled off into its climb, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had miscalculated. Isaiah remained silent, his presence a quiet rebuke to her assumptions. When Marissa returned, her expression was unreadable. "The captain's been informed, ma'am. But unless there's a specific threat, we can't take further action mid-flight. Mr. Coleman is a verified passenger with no issues on record." Evelyn's stomach tightened. She opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, Isaiah reached into his jacket pocket. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it up. The gold FBI badge gleamed under the cabin lights, its weight silencing the hum of the plane around them. Evelyn froze, her breath catching in her throat as the reality of who she had challenged sank in. The hum of the Boeing 737's engines filled the first-class cabin, a steady drone that underscored the sudden silence following Isaiah Coleman's reveal. The FBI badge in his hand wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a sledgehammer, shattering the fragile framework of Evelyn Harper's assumptions. She sat rigid in her seat, her silk scarf suddenly feeling too tight around her neck, her pulse thudding against her temples. The golden emblem caught the light with every slight tilt of Isaiah's wrist, a silent testament to authority she hadn't anticipated. Around them, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, passengers craned their necks, some subtly, others unabashedly, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama at 30,000 feet. Isaiah's expression remained calm, almost serene, as he lowered the badge and tucked it back into his jacket pocket with the same deliberate care he'd used to retrieve it. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, there was no trace of triumph in his demeanor, only a quiet resolve that made Evelyn's stomach twist. "If you feel unsafe, ma'am," he said, his voice low and even, "I'm happy to take a formal report. It's my job to ensure everyone's security on this flight." The words were polite, professional, but they carried a weight that pinned her in place. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out, her usual sharpness dulled by the sheer absurdity of her position. Marissa, the flight attendant, stood a few steps away, her arms crossed and her tablet clutched tightly against her chest. Her eyes flicked between Evelyn and Isaiah, a mixture of exasperation and quiet satisfaction playing across her features. She'd seen this kind of thing before, entitled passengers throwing their weight around, only to trip over their own egos, but this was a first. "Ma'am," she said, her tone firm but measured, "if there's no specific threat you'd like to report, I'll need you to remain seated and comply with our in-flight protocols. We're at cruising altitude now, and the captain's focus is on getting us to New York safely." Evelyn's face burned, a flush creeping up her cheeks as she registered the subtle reprimand. She wasn't used to being the one corrected, decades of commanding boardrooms had taught her that her word carried weight, that discomfort was something others bent over backwards to fix. But here, in this confined space hurtling through the sky, her influence felt paper-thin. She glanced around, catching the eyes of a middle-aged man in a pinstripe suit across the aisle who quickly looked away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks. A young woman 2 rows ahead had her phone angled discreetly, the faint red dot of a recording light barely visible. Evelyn's throat tightened. This wasn't just humiliation, it was public. "I don't need to report anything," she managed finally, her voice tight and clipped. "It was a misunderstanding." Isaiah nodded once, a gesture so subtle it might have been missed if she weren't hyper-aware of his every move. He reopened his laptop, the soft click of the lid echoing in her ears, and resumed his work as if nothing had happened. The dismissal stung more than any argument could have. She turned toward the window, staring blankly at the endless stretch of clouds below, her mind racing to salvage her dignity. She wasn't wrong to want comfort, she told herself. She'd earned this seat, this experience. But the nagging voice in the back of her head, one she'd spent years silencing, whispered a different truth. She'd misjudged him, and now she was paying the price. The flight stretched on, the minutes dragging like hours. Evelyn kept her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap, refusing to give Isaiah the satisfaction of seeing her squirm. But her eyes kept darting to him, drawn by an unwilling curiosity. His fingers moved deftly across the keyboard, pausing occasionally to jot notes on a legal pad. The papers beside him were a maze of diagrams, grids, coordinates, and what looked like surveillance logs. Whatever he was working on, it was serious, far beyond the mundane reports she dealt with in her corporate world. Who was this man? An FBI agent, yes, but there was more to him, something in the way he carried himself, a quiet strength that defied her initial dismissal. Halfway through the flight, the beverage cart rattled down the aisle, and Marissa paused beside them. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, her tone neutral but her eyes lingering on Evelyn for a beat longer than necessary. "Scotch, neat," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. Marissa nodded, then turned to Isaiah. "And for you, sir?" He looked up, offering a small, genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "Just water, thank you." His politeness grated on Evelyn, how could he be so unruffled after what had happened? Marissa handed him a bottle and a cup of ice, then poured Evelyn scotch with a practiced hand before moving on. Evelyn sipped her drink, the burn of the liquor grounding her as she stole another glance at Isaiah. He'd set his laptop aside and was now reviewing a handwritten letter, its edges worn as if it had been carried for years. She couldn't read the words, but the care with which he held it, his thumb brushing lightly over the paper, hinted at something personal, something human. It unsettled her more than the badge had. She'd pegged him as an intruder in her space, a challenge to her comfort, but now she saw glimpses of a story she hadn't bothered to consider. The realization prickled at her pride, and she took another sip to drown it. As the plane began its descent into New York, the cabin lights dimmed, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their approach to JFK. Evelyn's resolve hardened, she wouldn't let this define her trip. She'd disembark, check into her suite at the plaza, and put this behind her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A sudden jolt rocked the plane, the cabin lights flickering as a chorus of gasps rippled through the passengers. Evelyn's glass slipped from her hand, splashing scotch across her lap, and she gripped the armrests as the plane shuddered again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, tight with urgency, "we've hit unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. Flight crew, prepare for emergency procedures." Panic flared in Evelyn's chest, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She'd flown hundreds of times, but this felt different, raw, uncontrolled. Beside her, Isaiah snapped into motion, closing his laptop and securing it in his briefcase with a speed that belied his earlier calm. He turned to her, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You okay?" She nodded stiffly, too rattled to muster her usual composure. The plane lurched again, and a woman a few rows back let out a sharp cry. Marissa appeared, her face pale but determined, barking orders to her team as she checked seatbelts. Isaiah leaned closer, his presence steady amid the storm. "Listen to me," he said, his tone low but commanding. "We're going to be fine. The crew knows what they're doing, and I've handled worse than this. Just breathe." Evelyn stared at him, her pride warring with the fear clawing at her throat. She wanted to snap back, to reclaim her authority, but the sincerity in his eyes, steady, unyielding, silenced her. She nodded again, forcing herself to inhale deeply as the plane rocked. Minutes later, the turbulence subsided, the cabin settling into an uneasy quiet. The captain's voice returned, calmer now. "Apologies for the scare, folks. We're through the worst of it and should land on schedule." Relief washed over the passengers, a few clapping softly, but Evelyn remained tense, her hands still gripping the armrests. Isaiah leaned back, his gaze returning to the window, but not before he offered her a quiet, "Good job holding it together." The words were simple, almost offhand, but they landed like a lifeline. As the plane taxied to the gate, Evelyn felt the weight of the last hour pressing down on her, her misjudgment, the badge, the turbulence, and now this unexpected thread of connection. She didn't know what to make of Isaiah Coleman, but one thing was clear, he wasn't the man she'd assumed him to be. And as the seatbelt sign chimed off, she realized she wasn't quite the woman she'd thought she was either. The real test, she sensed, was still to come. The jetway at JFK International Airport was a tunnel of fluorescent light and recycled air, a stark contrast to the chaos Evelyn Harper had just endured at 30,000 feet. Her heels clicked unevenly against the floor as she disembarked, her silk scarf askew and her Louis Vuitton handbag clutched tighter than necessary. The turbulence had rattled her more than she cared to admit, leaving her nerves frayed and her composure cracked. Behind her, Isaiah Coleman moved with the same steady gait he'd maintained throughout the flight, his leather briefcase swinging lightly at his side. The FBI badge was back in his pocket, but its presence lingered in Evelyn's mind like an uninvited guest, challenging everything she thought she knew about control. The terminal was a swarm of activity, travelers rushing to baggage claim, announcements blaring overhead, and the faint scent of coffee drifting from a nearby kiosk. Evelyn's plan was simple: retrieve her luggage, hail a cab to the plaza, and drown the day's indignities in a glass of Pinot Noir. But as she approached the gate's exit, a commotion drew her attention. A cluster of passengers from their flight had gathered near a television mounted above the waiting area, their murmurs growing louder as they pointed at the screen. Evelyn slowed, her curiosity overriding her haste, and edged closer to see what had captured their focus. The news ticker scrolled across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters: "Breaking news, suspected terror threat disrupts flights at JFK, authorities on high alert." The anchor's voice cut through the chatter, crisp and urgent. "We're receiving reports of a credible threat targeting inbound flights to New York City. Sources indicate that federal agents are mobilizing at JFK to intercept a potential suspect. Passengers are advised to remain vigilant and cooperate with security personnel." A grainy image flashed on screen, a blurred figure in a dark jacket, captured mid-stride at an airport checkpoint. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The timestamp on the footage matched their flight's arrival window. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's our plane," a woman in a floral dress muttered, clutching her husband's arm. "They said inbound flights. What if it's here?" Evelyn's gaze darted to Isaiah, who had stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. He didn't look surprised, only focused, as if a switch had flipped inside him. Without a word, he set his briefcase on a nearby chair, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number, his voice low and clipped as he spoke. "This is Coleman. I'm at Gate 12, just off Flight 847 from Miami. I've got eyes on the terminal. What's the status?" Evelyn's breath caught. The pieces clicked into place: his laptop, the maps, the redacted files. He hadn't been some random passenger, he'd been working, tracking something, or someone, on their flight. Her earlier discomfort seemed trivial now, dwarfed by the weight of what might be unfolding. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this real?" Isaiah glanced at her, his expression unreadable, then held up a finger to signal her to wait as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Understood," he said after a moment, ending the call. He turned to her, his tone calm but firm. "It's real. And I need you to stay close." Her mind reeled. "Stay close? Why me?" Isaiah didn't hesitate. "Because you were sitting next to me for 3 hours, and if anyone on that plane was watching, they might assume you're involved. I don't take chances." Evelyn blinked, the absurdity of the situation warring with the adrenaline surging through her veins. She'd gone from trying to have him removed to being tethered to him in a potential crisis. Before she could protest, he added, "You're a target now, whether you like it or not. Let's move." The terminal buzzed with heightened tension as security personnel fanned out, their radios crackling with updates. Isaiah guided Evelyn toward the baggage claim, his hand hovering near her elbow without touching her, a gesture of control rather than comfort. She bristled at the implication but followed, her pride taking a back seat to the instinct to survive. "What's happening?" she demanded, her voice sharp despite the tremor beneath it. "Who are they looking for?" Isaiah kept his eyes scanning the crowd, his response measured. "Someone on our flight, or connected to it, might be carrying intel tied to a bigger operation. My team's been tracking it for weeks." "That turbulence? It wasn't just weather. It bought us time." Evelyn's heart thudded. The jolt she'd dismissed as a natural hiccup had been a deliberate maneuver, a stalling tactic orchestrated by forces she couldn't fathom. She glanced at him, seeing not just the badge but the man behind it, calculated, unflinching, a wall between chaos and order. "And you didn't think to mention this before," she snapped, her fear sharpening into anger. Isaiah's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. "You were too busy trying to get me kicked off. Didn't seem like the right moment." Her face flushed, but she had no retort. They reached the baggage claim, where a sea of suitcases spun on the conveyor belt, oblivious to the storm brewing above. Isaiah's phone buzzed again, and he stepped aside to answer, leaving Evelyn to process the surreal turn her day had taken. She watched him, noting the way he stood, shoulders squared, head tilted slightly as he listened, every muscle coiled with purpose. This wasn't the man she'd judged in first class, this was someone who carried lives in his hands, including, apparently, hers. A uniformed TSA agent approached, his badge glinting under the harsh lights. "Mr. Coleman?" he asked, his tone deferential. Isaiah nodded, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "That's me." "What's the word?" The agent lowered his voice. "We've got a partial match on a passenger from your flight, male, mid-30s, carrying a duffel bag. He's moving toward the east exit. Team's closing in, but we need you to confirm." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Description?" The agent rattled off details: height, build, a scar above the left eyebrow. Evelyn's mind flashed to a man she'd seen boarding, a nervous figure in a hoodie who'd avoided eye contact. She hadn't thought much of it then, but now it felt like a neon sign she'd ignored. "I'll handle it," Isaiah said, then turned to Evelyn. "Stay here. Don't move until I come back." She opened her mouth to argue, she wasn't some damsel to be ordered around, but the gravity in his eyes silenced her. He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the TSA agent at his heels. Left alone, Evelyn felt exposed, the weight of the news report pressing down on her. She scanned the faces around her, paranoia creeping in. Was the threat still here, watching her? Her hands trembled as she gripped her handbag, the familiar leather grounding her against the rising tide of fear. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying her unease. She replayed the flight in her mind, her petty complaints, her insistence on comfort, the way she dismissed Isaiah without a second thought. Shame gnawed at her, sharp and unfamiliar. She'd built her life on reading people, priding herself on her instincts, but she'd been blind to the man beside her, seeing only what she wanted to see. Now, thrust into his world, she felt small, unprepared, and oddly compelled to prove she wasn't just baggage he had to carry. A shout broke her reverie, sharp, commanding, from the direction Isaiah had gone. The crowd parted, revealing him wrestling a man to the ground, the duffel bag skidding across the floor. TSA agents swarmed in, cuffs flashing as they secured the suspect. Isaiah stood, brushing off his suit, his chest heaving slightly from the effort. He caught her eye across the chaos, a silent acknowledgement that the immediate danger was over. Relief flooded her, but it was laced with something else, respect, grudging but real. As he approached, she straightened, meeting his gaze with a defiance she didn't fully feel. "You could have warned me," she said, her voice steadier now. Isaiah tilted his head, studying her. "Would you have listened?" The question hung between them, a mirror to her earlier arrogance. She didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. He nodded toward the exit. "Come on. We're not done yet." And with that, Evelyn Harper, corporate queen, first-class fixture, followed an FBI agent into the unknown, her world irrevocably shifted. The air outside JFK International Airport was crisp, tinged with the metallic bite of an early New York evening. The sky had deepened to a bruised purple, streaked with the last threads of daylight as Evelyn Harper stepped onto the curb beside Isaiah Coleman. The chaos of the terminal, flashing lights, shouting agents, the subdued suspect in cuffs, faded into a dull roar behind them, replaced by the honk of taxis and the shuffle of weary travelers. Evelyn's silk scarf fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to the tension still coiled in her chest. Her designer heels felt unsteady on the uneven pavement, but she stood tall, her gaze fixed on Isaiah as he scanned the street with the vigilance of a hawk. He hadn't said much since the takedown, his focus split between coordinating with his team via earpiece and ensuring she stayed within arm's reach. The duffel bag, now in TSA custody, had contained encrypted drives, intel tied to a smuggling ring his unit had been chasing for months. The suspect wasn't the mastermind, just a courier, but his capture was a crack in the case that could bring the whole operation down. Isaiah's role in it was clear now. He wasn't just a passenger with a badge, he was a linchpin, a man who carried the weight of unseen battles. And Evelyn, by sheer accident of proximity, had stumbled into his orbit. "Where to now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Isaiah glanced at her, his dark eyes assessing. "Debriefing. My team's setting up at a field office nearby. You're coming with me." Her brows shot up, indignation flaring. "I'm not one of your agents. I have a hotel reservation, a schedule." He cut her off with a raised hand, his tone firm but not unkind. "This isn't optional, Ms. Harper. You were next to me on that flight, and you made a scene. If there's a leak, if someone's watching, you're a loose end they might target. I need you safe until we're sure." The words landed like a punch, stripping away her illusion of control. She wasn't just a witness, she was a liability. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded, swallowing her protests. They climbed into a black SUV that pulled up moments later, driven by a stone-faced agent who barely acknowledged her. The ride was silent, the city blurring past in a haze of lights and shadows. Evelyn stared out the window, her mind a tangle of regret and resolve. She'd spent the flight fixated on her comfort, blind to the stakes unfolding beside her. Now, thrust into a world of danger and duty, she felt like a child playing dress-up in a war zone. But beneath the shame, a spark flickered, anger, not at Isaiah, but at herself. She wasn't helpless. She'd built a career on strategy and grit. If she was in this, she'd find a way to matter. The field office was a nondescript building tucked between a deli and a dry cleaner, its gray facade belying the hive of activity within. Inside, agents moved with purpose, phones ringing, screens glowing with data, a whiteboard scrawled with timelines and names. Isaiah led her to a small conference room, where a woman in a sharp blazer awaited, her badge clipped to her belt. "Agent Torres," Isaiah introduced, nodding to the woman. "She'll take your statement." Torres, a wiry figure with a no-nonsense stare, gestured for Evelyn to sit. "Start from the top, Ms. Harper. Everything you saw on that flight." Evelyn recounted the day, her initial unease, the call button, the turbulence, her voice clipped as she skirted the edges of her prejudice. Torres listened, jotting notes, her expression unreadable until Evelyn reached the badge reveal. "So he showed it after you pressed the safety issue?" Torres asked, her pen pausing. Evelyn nodded, heat creeping up her neck. "Yes. I misjudged the situation." Torres exchanged a glance with Isaiah, who stood by the door, arms crossed. "That's one way to put it," she said dryly, then waved a hand. "You're free to go after this, but stay reachable. We might need you again." As Torres left, Isaiah lingered, his presence filling the room. Evelyn stood, smoothing her skirt, and met his gaze. "I owe you an apology," she said, the words tasting foreign but necessary. "I was wrong about you." He tilted his head, studying her. "You weren't wrong to want comfort. You were wrong to think it's a zero-sum game, that my being there took something from you." The insight cut deeper than she expected, exposing the root of her actions. She nodded, silent, grappling with the truth of it. Before she could respond, an agent burst in, breathless. "Coleman, we've got a problem. The courier's talking, says there's a second player, someone who boarded with him. They split at the gate." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Description?" The agent rattled off details: female, late 50s, silver hair, designer bag. Evelyn's blood ran cold. It matched her. Isaiah's eyes snapped to her, realization dawning. "They saw us together," he muttered. "They think you're my contact." Panic surged, but Evelyn clamped it down, her mind racing. "What does that mean?" Isaiah stepped closer, his voice low. It means they'll come for you, either to silence you or use you. We need to move. Her heart pounded, but she saw an opening, a chance to rewrite her story. Then use me, she said, her tone firm. If they think I'm part of this, make it true. I can help. Isaiah blinked, caught off guard. You're a civilian, she cut him off. I'm a strategist. I read people, manipulate outcomes. You need bait, I'll be it. He hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Within minutes, they had a plan. Evelyn would pose as his undercover partner, drawing the second suspect out at a staged meetup in Times Square. The team rigged her with a wire, her handbag swapped for one with a tracker. As they prepped, Isaiah handed her a burner phone. You don't have to do this, he said. She met his gaze, steady. Yes, I do. For me. It wasn't just about survival, it was about proving she could rise above her mistakes. The operation unfolded under the neon glow of Times Square, the crowd a chaotic shield. Evelyn stood near a pretzel cart, her posture casual but her senses sharp, the wire humming against her skin. Isaiah watched from a distance, his voice crackling in her earpiece. Stay calm. She's close. Moments later, a woman approached, nervous, twitchy, a scarf pulled tight around her face. You're with him? She hissed, glancing around. Evelyn nodded, channeling years of boardroom poise. Yes. You have the package? The woman hesitated, then reached into her coat, only to freeze as agents swarmed in, Isaiah at the lead. She was cuffed in seconds, the intel secured. Back at the field office, the adrenaline drained from Evelyn, leaving her shaky but exhilarated. Isaiah approached, his expression softer now. You were good out there. Better than good. She smiled faintly, exhaustion mingling with pride. I had a decent teacher. He chuckled, a rare sound, then handed her a card, his real one, not a burner. If you ever want a career change, call me. She took it, the weight of possibility settling in her hands. Days later, at the plaza, Evelyn sipped her Pinot Noir, the city sprawling beyond her window. The news lauded the FBI's success, her name absent but her impact real. She'd faced her flaws, pride, prejudice, and turned them into strength, not alone, but alongside a man she'd once tried to erase. The badge moment had been a shock, but this was her triumph. She set the glass down, picked up Isaiah's card, and dialed. Agent Coleman, she said when he answered, about that career change. His laugh echoed through the line, a bridge to a future she hadn't foreseen.